Welcome back to How to Craft Fair. This is the 12th episode in the How to Become a Craft Fair Organizer series. I'm excited about today's episode because we're going to be talking about confirmed vendor list. And this is one of the things that gained us a reputation as being organized organizers. So I'm going to show you from scratch how to build out a confirmed vendor list and how it's going to help you to maintain a stress-free workload leading up to your event. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to want to do is make a spreadsheet, and I'm going to show you how to do this on Google Drive. Okay, so if you have a Gmail account, you have a Google Drive account by default, and the way that you can access that is going up into this corner here where it has the 9 dots and it says Google Apps. So you'd click on that, and then right down here is Google Drive. So then you'd want to click that. And then that's going to take you to your Drive account. Now, Drive is fantastic because it gives you 15 gigs of free space that you can use for anything. File creations, file saving, file sharing, all that sort of thing. So if you have a team of people that work with you for your craft fair, so like let's just say, for example, you're in a partnership where maybe there's 2 or 3 or multiple people like we were, then multiple people can have access to the Google Drive account. Okay, so you can kind of work on things together. So that is very important. Now, if you're working solo, of course, this isn't nearly as complicated, but again, if you're a team, a Google Drive account is a very good idea to have because it enables you to work remotely, but yet together. All right, so we would go up to the corner here, the top left corner where it says New, and you want to click on that, and you're going to click on Google Sheets. And this is essentially an Excel document for those of you who are familiar with Microsoft Office and the suite of products that they have. This is essentially the same thing, okay? So what you want to do is you want to create a header, and that is going to have specific things that you can sort through. Okay, so you want to click on this row 1 right here. And I guess before we get into any more detail, let's go ahead and just name the document. Okay, so let's just give it some kind of a name that would be relevant to a craft fair. So let's say that this is going to be Springtime Shoptacular. That sounds kind of ridiculous for an event, but we're going to go ahead and just roll with it. And so let's go ahead back to getting this header in place. All right. So one thing that I liked to do just to make the header stand out was make the entire row black. Okay. So you would go to this fill color, you turn it black, and then I take my text, the one right next door, and I make that white. So no matter what I put in here, it's going to stand out really well against the rest of the chart. Okay. So that's going to look really good. Now, our first column that we want to put in here is business name. And this is going to be the vendor's business name. So again, we're just keeping in mind everybody that's signing up for the show and all of the relevant, important information that you want to keep on this confirmed vendor list as you start to book vendors for your event. You need to be able to find people quickly, and all their booth designations that we're going to get into in further detail, you're going to need a column for each of those things. So the first thing that we want is business name. And let me go ahead and make this bold here just to make it stand out even more. There we go. Looks great. So business name is our first column. Then you want to have their name in general, okay? Because some vendors don't always have a business name. So just for example, artists, especially artists that are on kind of like the higher end type of art, sometimes it'll just be like art by Jane Doe or whoever, okay? So sometimes it's just the name, and you want to be able to have that as well. So next to name, we're going to put electric with a question mark. And the reason why you want to have this as a designation is it becomes really important when you start to map out your booths and the placement of all your vendors. This is a really important field to keep in mind. So I like to keep this kind of on the left-hand side close to their business name. And as we continue working our way over, we're going to put category. And this is probably the most important column that we're going to have. And we'll talk a little bit about this column in greater detail in a moment. But the way that we did ours was we color coded ours so that it made everything stand out further, not only on this spreadsheet, but you have to think about how this is going to translate to when you're mapping out your haul. So I showed you that video previously in the series where you can actually map out the vendors based on a color code, where that's where this is going to come into play. Okay, so you want those to match up so that it becomes really obvious where the placement of everybody is in your haul. Now we're going to do a little bit of admin type of stuff, and we're going to put pay date as one column. And then we're also going to follow that with pay type and then the amount of their payment, because if you have different options for booths, like let's just say, for example, electric or non-electric, that could affect the amount. So you want to have that noted in here. And then you, of course, want to have the vendor email address on here just in case you need to reach out to anybody in particular, like a singular email. Or this is also going to come into play when you do your mass email, when you reach out to vendors for updates and things like that to keep them in the loop. And then I also like to have a column that says request and notes. Okay, so on your vendor application, you'll probably have something that says special request or special booth placement, a little area for them to, jot something down if they'd like to. And this is where you can keep that organized on your end, besides what's actually on the application. So I like to make this area pretty wide because sometimes the request can be a little bit specific or something in particular where it doesn't really fit very well in a small little column like this. So I like to make this one pretty wide. The other ones, we might need a little bit of space here and there as it kind of gets filled out. Business names, sometimes those can get a little bit long. The regular name, if there are two people. So let's say, for example, there's a vendor who, like a husband and wife duo, or maybe like a sibling or mother and daughter type of situation at a booth. Sometimes you got two names or multiple that you got to squeeze in there. So it's nice to kind of give a little bit of room. But the rest, let's just kind of leave that for now. And we're going to move along and start to fill this in a little bit. Now, once we reach this point, one of the things that you're going to have to decide as an organizer is how many different categories of arts and crafts do you want to attract to your event? And you can phrase these categories any way that you like to, but please feel free to use the following as an example and run with it, or just straight up copy it. Don't really care. But I'm just going to show you the way that we did it in order to keep ourselves organized. Not only just, again, on an administration level on the back end as organizers, but also in helping us to know which types of vendors we need to try to attract for the event and which ones we should stop booking, or vendors that might be allowed into the event just based on maybe a certain category is getting too populated. Okay, so you have to just keep track of that so that there's not a ridiculous amount of one type of vendors at the show. So that's very important. But I'm going to go ahead and fill this in now. Okay, so this is what we're going to roll with right here. Let's just say that these are your categories. There might be more. There might be some that you won't use. There might be some others. For example, one thing I just thought of again is upcycling. Okay, so that's another good one. All right, but let's just stop here just for the sake of making this tutorial not 3 hours long. All right, so what you want to do now is you got to have these color coded. Again, mostly for mapping purposes, but even on this chart, it's going to really just help you to make sure that you're not overbooking, or, if you can identify things that you need to fill and go from there. All right. So we always used the same color set for every event. So basically we created a spreadsheet that was a template, and we saved that template with all the categories already filled in. And then that way, when we started to book vendors for a new event, we were just using a repeated template over and over and just saving them as different titles depending on the year of an event or the title of an event, where it's located, things like that. All right. So that's something I would definitely recommend, is getting a confirmed vendor list built out to your liking, to where nothing specific is filled in yet as far as, people's names and stuff like that, but all of the bare bone essentials are built into it, and save it as a template and then just keep using that over and over. It's going to just save you a ton of time from show to show. But as far as the category colors go, all that you need to do is just start designating a color for a category. So some kind of makes sense. Like, for example, woodwork, you definitely want like a brown color, right? I mean, brown like wood, so that's good. But, that doesn't show up very well with the black font. So we're going to switch that one over to the white. And then there we are. So woodwork is done. That looks great. Textile crafts, we always use kind of like this bright blue. So that's good. Now you want to just go down the line and start assigning a color to a category. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And if you need to write this down any place, or for example, if you want to use like hex colors, I've shown people how to do that in a couple of different videos, but you would just enter in a custom color and then it would ask you for a hex code. Okay, so that would be the 6-digit or 6-character combination that you would put in right there. And that way, if you want custom colors for any of these, you'd be able to do that. All right, so let's just roll with this for now. That looks good. And then I do like to put a couple different colors in to make things stand out a little bit more. So for electric or non-electric, I do tend to color code those for no or yes, just to make those stand out a little bit more, but that's optional. And you're going to be able to do that pretty easily just by using this fill color right here. You could just even use like a gray for yes or no, whatever works. But again, for the sake of keeping this relatively basic, we're just going to continue on and not have that color coded. Another category that I used to color code was the pay type right here, because if somebody paid us by check, or back in the day, we did accept PayPal, which I know that some vendors get a little bit nervous about, but it was super convenient for us to handle those kind of payments, especially if it came to any kind of like a refund situation. So it was always nice to do those. So whatever kind of payment types you accept, you want to just be sure that you're keeping track of those for every single person, because again, if something needs to be refunded, or some kind of partial refund, or if there's some sort of pay discrepancy where, perhaps somebody said that they paid you a certain amount, and there's a little bit of a conflict there, you can always refer back to the pay date, the pay amount, and the pay type. Okay, so these three are going to be very useful for you if you ever have to go back and look at anything. But as far as color coding things, that's really about it on this front page for now. I'll touch on that in a moment, but for this front page, as you start to book vendors for your event, you want to just keep this up to date. And I'm talking day to day. Every single day, this is something that you want to keep up to date, especially if you don't have like a deadline to sign up. So some organizers of craft fairs, they'll have like a deadline where it's something that says all vendors absolutely have to be applied to the event by a certain date. And then we, as the organizers, will make the decision on who is in the show and who is a backup, like a reserve vendor, just in case if there's cancellations or whatnot, or if straight up somebody just wasn't accepted into the event. So you basically have to keep all of that clear. Okay. So again, kind of pointing these three columns out right here, the pay date, the pay type, and the pay amount, that's going to come into play, especially when you have people reserving booths in advance who might not even be accepted into the event. So that's very important to keep this straight. Now, this is the first sheet of this confirmed vendor list spreadsheet. All right. So what we're going to do is go ahead and create a second sheet, and we're going to come back to the first one, click on the row, our header row, basically. We're going to copy that, and we're going to come back to sheet 2, and we're going to paste that back in so that it is all set for us, and we don't have to do the work that we did before. Now, you want to name your sheets. Okay, so this right here, I would go ahead and rename it to confirmed vendors. All right. And then your sheet number 2, you're going to rename that to backups. All right. Or something similar, maybe like fill in or reserve vendors. There's a whole bunch of different names for it, but basically it's vendors who are willing to participate in your event, but they couldn't get in generally, in time or whatever the situation might be in order to be considered part of the show straight up. Okay. So they're basically a fill-in, and you want to keep this as organized as your front sheet. And for the number of backups that you want to have, you don't have to go too crazy with it. I would say about 10 to 20% of your show you want to have as backups. Okay, so let's just make it simple. Let's say that you're going to have a craft fair that's 100 booths. Well, I would probably have 10 backups. Okay, so for every 100, maybe have 10. And then, that gives you plenty of people who you can reach out to who might be interested in the event if something doesn't work out with your main registered vendors. Be sure to use the color codes for the category to keep things straight, especially when it comes to your backups, because what's going to happen is eventually you need to create a new column here on your front page, and that one is going to be booth. All right, so in the beginning, you're basically just going to be booking your vendors, and you're going to be watching your categories to say, okay, we want to have 4 bath and body, 4 food and snack, 4 health and beauty. You want to have this balanced, okay? Or just, for example, if you want to make your event more about glasswork, metalwork, leatherwork, woodwork, these 4, you want to kind of have those just balanced, all right? So you need to watch this as you book your vendors. But once you get to the point where you're fully booked, you have enough vendors for your facility, then you need to slide this way over either here, or I would put it all the way in the front, and that is going to be the booth number that they're assigned to. So again, in the previous video in this series, I showed you how to make your layout, and that layout is going to have booth numbers for every single booth that you have in the facility. Now, as you start to book your vendors, okay, so we're going to have John's Crafts, we're going to have Jane's Crafts, we're going to have Bill's Crafts. All right, great. So as you start to book these vendors, you need to know where in the facility these are going to be assigned to, okay? And this is how you start to get that vision of the layout. And you need to be sure that you're not putting a health and beauty person next to another health and beauty person, okay? Because you're going to book multiple vendors within categories. It's just the way it is because there's only so many different types of arts and crafts, okay? So as you start to book, say, for example, a few different people who do bath, body, and scent, a couple different people who make candles, you need to make sure that in the layout that these people are spread far apart, okay? So that's where all of this sort of starts to tie in together and take shape, okay? So very important to keep all this organized as possible so that you don't put competing vendors next to one another. Now, another column that you can consider having is some sort of column for yourself, basically, again, an administrative type of note. So this column can be, so you can rename it if you like. You could put something like vendor request and notes. And then over here, you can name this one something slightly different. You can put organizer notes. And then that way, anything that the vendor is requesting, Let's just say, for example, I'd like to be towards the back of the hall or the front of the hall, or I need to be near a restroom, something like that. Anything like that can go in here, something that the vendor is requesting. But on your end, if you need to keep track of something, like let's just say, for example, you have two vendors who you like working with, but maybe two vendors who don't really get along that well, or maybe their items are a little bit too identical, or just something that you need to remember. Put that in the organizer notes over here. And then that way you'll always have that right nearby whenever you see or whenever you're working on something for either one of those vendors, or whatever it might be. You can kind of keep that in mind, and it's always reminding you, and it's always in front of your face. Okay. So you can't forget it. Some vendors, for example, another request that you might see fairly often as an organizer is some vendors get along really well and they like participating in shows together. So they'll kind of just go from event to event, and they'll join and sign up for shows together. So sometimes you'll see requests where it's like Jane wants to be next to Bill, and then that would be a good thing to put in here, because that's going to come into play when you assign booths, that you want to be sure that you're putting them together. Okay. So even though they signed up independently and they've made their own payments independently and they sent in their own application independently, they can still want to participate in it, within the vicinity of one another. So that's something that you'll see pretty often as an organizer. But anyways, I guess what I'm getting down to is that this chart and the confirmed vendors, the backups, you can even make a third tab if you want, and you can put like a big note section on every vendor. Maybe you have conversations with them and you go around and you talk to them, and you can kind of remember things for next time. Or, as unfortunate as it might be, most craft fair organizers, they do have what's considered a blacklist. Okay. And that is basically when something happens with a vendor where you don't want to work with them anymore. And you're going to work with so many vendors that the sheer volume is going to make it hard to remember specific situations with specific vendors. Okay. So you want to be sure that if something goes wrong where you can no longer work with a vendor, you need to make sure that you're keeping track of that, and you have to be incredibly specific on your blacklist. Okay. Why do you not want to work with them anymore? Why don't maybe they want to work with you anymore? It can kind of go both ways, really. And what are the reasons? What is the date that this occurred? Just write everything down. You have to write everything down, and never share your blacklist with anyone. Okay. That I would consider to be something that should be 100% kept in private. Unless the only side note that I would make with that is that they're putting other people in jeopardy that maybe you associate with. So maybe they are trying to scam other people. So we see a lot of scamming that's pretty common on Facebook and stuff like that. But then again, we never really meet those people. So that type of situation, it might be kind of rare. But like I said, a blacklist, I think you need to kind of keep it to yourself for the most part, and just keep it really detailed. And you can do one per event, but you're probably not going to encounter people that you need to ban from your events at every show that you host. Okay. I would consider that to be a pretty rare occurrence. What I would do is probably just create a spreadsheet on its own as your blacklist. That's what we did. And then you can kind of update it as you need to. And honestly, you're probably not going to use it very much. In, I think, 10 years of hosting events, I'm pretty sure we had less than 10 people on it in 10 years. So, I mean, that kind of gives you an idea of, people need to be pretty obnoxious in order to, not be welcome back to one of our events. There would be certain situations here and there that, maybe we didn't necessarily, think was like the best decision, but pretty rarely was it something that it couldn't be worked out. You know what I mean? So just keep that in mind. You don't want to just start blacklisting everybody that's out there, because that's, I think word's going to get around about that. You need to be able to be willing to work with people. So that's part of your job as an organizer. And I think that's pretty much reserved for like situations that are just beyond repair. But this is a confirmed vendor list. It kind of gives you an idea of how to shape it and why these columns are here. So again, you can add in columns of your own. This is just giving you an idea, but think of why you're putting a column in there, and is it going to help your in-person experience? At the end of the day, that's kind of what it boils down to, is that you're setting up this back end stuff so that you can have the best day possible and that your vendors can have the best day possible. You want to provide crystal clear clarity on everything, because they're going to appreciate that. They're going to be worried about a lot of different stuff, and getting to the event, getting set up, finding their booth, knowing where you're going to be as the organizer, all of that stuff that should be taken care of by you ahead of time for them, okay, so that they know what's going on ahead of time. And as you start to fill this out, keep it as organized as possible, because when we get further into this series, I'm going to talk about sending a mass email to all your registered vendors. That's one of the most important steps that you have as an organizer leading up to the event. And this chart is going to play a huge hand in making that so much easier, okay? Because again, they need to know which booth number they have. They need to know where the booth is. They're going to want to know kind of who's around them, all that different stuff, okay? So it's very important to keep this organized, not just for yourself, but again, for your vendors. So this was the 12th episode in the How to Become a Craft Fair Organizer series. I hope that you've enjoyed the journey so far. To check out all the other videos in this series, click on the playlist shown here, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the content. Please, it helps me quite a bit, so I'd really appreciate that. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and have yourself a great day.